Inside the halls of San Diego State University lies a program dedicated to storytelling and pursuing the truth. Welcome to Where You At, a podcast that takes you inside the work of alumni for the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State. Our goal is to show the success of our alumni, inspire students with the stories, and connect students and alums on a pathway to journalism success. And now, here's your host, Josh Sushan.
This week on the Where You At podcast, we are heading out to Boston. Topics this week: sports media relations, sports marketing, some crisis management, and I cannot wait for this week's guest. His name is Darin Wong. He attended San Diego State from 2000 through 2004. He pretty much immediately went to work for the university. He worked for a long time, 14 years as assistant athletic media relations. Now he is at Harvard as the director athletic communications. Darin, it is good to see you again, my friend. Welcome to the Where You At podcast.
Thanks for having me.
This is so cool because Darin and I did not go to school at the same time, but we knew a number of different people and got connected many, many years ago. And it's just been fun to get to know him. And you constantly see the different branches of the San Diego State tree and all the different people that you know and get to know. And, oh yeah, I know that person. And, you know, it's just like, it never ceases to amaze me, Darin, and I'm sure you can feel the same way about just the number of San Diego State connections, and you just never even know all about them. And then when you do, just how cool it is.
Yeah, you know, previous podcasts, a lot of people referenced the Final Four last year, and I wasn't going to go. But after Lamont Butler hit that shot, my wife kind of pushed me out the door. You know, being there on the ground, you saw so many different people. It was like a big reunion. People from former basketball managers, former people like yourself that you kind of come across, cross paths with. It's pretty special, you know, and out east, there's not a lot of us. And so anytime I could see somebody like a familiar face or something in common like San Diego State University is always a good thing.
Let's go back to how you started at San Diego State. Why'd you pick San Diego State? Why'd you pick communications to major in?
As working in athletics, everyone, I grew up loving sports. Growing up in the LA area, it was, Dodgers, Lakers, Raiders, Kings. And, when they're on TV, you watch all the other teams in the greater LA area, the Ducks, the Angels, and so on and so forth. And so, I applied to a ton of schools. I only got into 3: UC Riverside, UC Irvine, and San Diego State. And San Diego State, I remember watching, on ESPN2, 9:00 Pacific, Big Monday, and, catching certain football games. And that was really the draw for me from an academic standpoint. They were the only ones that had like communications, like journalism communications, where the other ones were more like communication studies and, things that had to do with speech communication. And so that was the reason, the 2 big reasons. And obviously being from LA, it's a short drive and I could pop back home, if I needed to. So that was the reason why I chose San Diego State over the other 2 UC schools.
Tell us the story of how you ventured over to the sports information department or media relations. What year were you in school? What was the beginning of you getting involved with them?
Yeah, I started, I saw like a flyer in the PSFA building and it just said, are you interested in sports? Do you want to work in sports? And, call this number. And that was I want to say either the end of my sophomore year or the beginning of my junior year. And I just popped into the media relations office and talked to someone and they were like, come on in. We got a football game, in like a week. And so I went to one of the offices for a meeting just to kind of talk about the game. And my first event was a football game. Kevin Clintworth, who's at Oklahoma State, he's the one who kind of brought me on. I learned a lot from Mike May, who was the number 2 at the time, and Peggy Curtin. From there, the rest is kind of history. The first game was football, and they wanted me to go down to the locker room when the locker rooms were open to get quotes. And I had never been in a locker room before. And they basically said, follow the herd. And so I just kind of stuck with the other writers and came in with a recorder and just, record, and went upstairs and started typing away. You think after all these years I'd be good at transcribing, and man, I am not.
We could probably get into a conversation about AI in transcription, but we'll save that for later. At what point do you start to think, I like this, or I like this a lot, or this is going to be my path going down this avenue of sports and communications?
Starting my junior year, those last 2 years of my undergrad, I was just in the office all the time, not getting paid. I just kind of like being around, and they giving me some grunt work, cutting out, newspaper articles, pasting them to papers and photocopying them and putting them in like, player folders for future reference and or historical purposes. And at times they would just give me some press releases to write, and I was a big football and basketball guy, and they give me the certain duties to do in the game notes, and I just thought it was awesome. And then on game days you're sitting in the press box and seeing people that you watch on TV, and I just love being around it. I think back and I wish I maybe would have tailgated a couple times. I've never tailgated at a San Diego State football game. So, I did that for 2 years, and at the time they had 3 intern spots open. And so May was coming around, May of 2004, and they asked if I wanted to fill one of those positions, and I did. In that role, you were kind of like a primary sport contact for at the time. Like, I think I had both tennises, water polo, and swimming, and so you just kind of cut your teeth on that. And it was a good experience. I did that for a year. I didn't have another job lined up after that, and so I did it again. Actually, the guy who's the head of the office now, Jamie McConaughey, he and I started at the same time, and so he's still there. But yeah, no, going in, as my senior year was kind of ending, I knew that this was something I could do and I was interested in, and so that's why I took the jump and did those did the 1 year of internship, which ended up being 2.
You mentioned that you never tailgated before, and I think this is an important distinction for those who are thinking about getting involved in sports, whether it's as a writer, a broadcaster, media relations, even from the marketing standpoint, especially as more and more students want to follow this path. And I constantly just sound like this old man on the soapbox yelling at the clouds about, you can be a fan, but you can't be a reporter and a fan at the same time. You have to pick. And, you can't wear certain clothing if you are a reporter. And even as a member of the university, you might be wearing the brand because that's your employer, but you can't be like cheering. You have to be a professional. So I'm curious to learn from you, Darin, what your evolution was. Who were the people who were standing on the soapbox imparting wisdom to you about how to be proud of your university, but how you can't be a fan when you do this job?
Yeah, it's hard. I was in a unique position, and I still kind of am, being an alum and knowing a lot of these people personally. It's a tough deal. I think early on it was ingrained in us, like, there's no cheering in the press box. I mean, there really isn't. And, at times there were people who would cheer.
They get the dirtiest looks.
And then the people above me had to go, let them know there's no cheering in the press box. And so you learn very quickly what you can and cannot do. I think if you have any sort of feel when you're sitting in that press box and no one is saying a word, you don't want to be that one person to stick out. If you do end up clapping or, obviously human emotion, if there's a big hit or a big shot and people make a little bit of noise, like, what are you going to do? But, usually it's not people overtly cheering. And so I think it's easy to kind of fall in line if you have any type of feel.
So because you did so many fascinating things when you were at San Diego State, we're going to get into all your work with the university, but I don't want to neglect anything else that you did throughout your time as a student that would be valuable for this discussion, that was not related to athletics, or maybe even something else that was related to athletics, about just like best memories of just being a student at San Diego State.
So a lot of people don't know that I worked for 3 years with the physical plant and the grounds crew. And so what that entailed was waking up super early. I think we started either 6 or 6:30, and we drive the golf carts around, and we're the ones responsible for making sure the trash cans were empty by the time everyone got to campus. And after that, it was a lot of like mowing lawns and raking leaves. And there's a tree that I planted over there near the music building that I think is still there. But I mean, though, it was great because you're outside. It's pretty chill. There's some physical labor involved, but no big deal. But I mean, I like that type of work, and it was different. I guess you could call it blue collar work, but I loved it being outside. And then on the days I wasn't working, I went into the athletic media relations office. But yeah, no, my time at San Diego State was great. I've seen the campus evolve because when I first started, it was the old Aztec Center, with Monty's Pub there, the bowling alley downstairs, and Sabaro, Sub Connection. My 4 years there were fantastic.
So you mentioned that when you first started with media relations, tennis, different sports like that. Tell us how you move up the ladder, so to speak, and start being involved with men's basketball.
Yeah, no, I think just working hard at the things that I had kind of built some trust with, at the time, Mike May was the men's basketball contact, and that trust, he had a lot of trust in me. So when it became time to work on men's basketball game notes, he'd give me those things, and I'd like to say the work was good, or at least not incorrect. And so that kind of got me in my foot in the door with the men's basketball program from a media relations standpoint. So much so, my second year, I started traveling with them. And so I mentioned Kevin Clintworth earlier. He ended up taking a job at Cal, and Mike May was elevated to the head role. So he had football. And as you know, with football season, toward the end, it overlaps with the beginning of basketball season. And so he had to stay back with football. And that's how I started traveling with the men's basketball team I think I was like 22, 23 years old and not knowing a thing. Our first trip was to Fairbanks, Alaska. That was an experience that I'll never forget. And so I think that's how I kind of got going. I used to do a couple of the non-conference road trips while football was wrapping up. And, every year I slowly started to take on more of a role with that operation.
All right. You mentioned game notes and making sure that everything is accurate. And so this leads into one of my favorite topics that we're going to discuss, because it might be my most favorite stat when it comes to San Diego State. And that was the streak that this team had of when they had the lead with 5 minutes left, they did not lose. And it was unbelievable how long this streak lasted, the number of years, how high it got. And for me, I took such pride in this because when I was a student in the 90s, they just constantly lost. It was just finding ways to lose. My first year, the team was 2-26. There was only 1 year the team even had a winning record. And now when you're there, not only are they winning, but they're not choking at the end. So give us the evolution of just coming up with this streak that when they lead with 5 minutes to go, they never lose.
I don't even remember how it began. I'll give credit to Mike May on that one. He's got a mind for those types of things. And I just, I don't remember, but I envision it one day, him saying, hey, we've won like 72 in a row or whatever that, throw out a number when leading with 5 minutes to go. I'm like, no way. And obviously with box scores and things like that, you can go back in time and do that. It takes a little bit of legwork, especially at the time we were doing it. But yeah, no, you're right. They did lose a lot. They lost a lot my early years. And it was something, you look up at the clock, whether it's 2 points or whether it's 6 points or 12 points with 5 minutes to go, you're like, this thing's over. And so it was a cool stat. Definitely something that we pushed out as often as we could. And, in the end, you just hope it doesn't bite you. And, all good things come to an end. I think they lost to Boise State to snap it. But yeah, even if you drop one, it's still remarkable. Whether, you could be like 50-1 in the last 51 times, you're leaving with 5 minutes to go. And so it's something that that, I think as an office, we hung our hat on. And obviously you don't want to jinx things, but, we don't have any control over that.
Yeah, let's talk about jinxing things, because especially in my life as a play-by-play announcer, and the day before we recorded this, someone was getting all over me because I talked about, oh, this guy has been striking all these guys. He has not walked anyone. And I'm just hyping up about how well he's performing. And then ball 4, ball 8, ball 12, ball 16, he walks in a run. And I'm just getting crushed around the batting cage because of the broadcaster's jinx. So let's talk about the media relations department's jinx, which, by the way, does not exist. It's your job to promote and hype up what the team has done. But yet people in sports are very, very superstitious about jinxes, Darin. How do you balance this?
You just don't let it affect you. I think bottom line, like, we aren't on the coaching staff. And so, like, our job, like you mentioned, is to help promote the program or the school, whatever it is. And that's part of it. If in this case, like, our streak is broken or pitcher starts walking everybody, I mean, that's not something that we can control. We're here just to, the old school way is sports information department. And that's what we're doing. We're providing information to help, whether it's writers, radio, TV, help them do their job to help inform the people, their audience. And so that's how I kind of look at it.
Let's talk about TV. So again, let's say it's a basketball game and CBS Sports Network or FS1 is coming to town and they're broadcasting the game. I'm going to pick Rich Waltz and Steve Lapis, for example. That's play-by-play, an analyst, and you have a producer. Give us some behind the scenes of how you work with them in advance when they arrive on campus for maybe shoot around, any other notes that you want to provide them just so that you can help kind of direct some of the storylines about San Diego State.
Yeah, like when you find out who the broadcast team is, typically I would send them a game or two before that game, our box scores, our season stats, and things like that, any news clippings, to help them prepare for our game. I think a lot of times it gets lost that these guys are doing games all over the country and they don't necessarily prepare for you until they have to. And so I want to give them enough information to help them be informed on us. Sometimes they want to have a conversation with our coach ahead of time. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, but many times I'll offer up myself, especially like when you're with the team for, on road trips or just around them so often, like you can almost speak to like how the coaches would talk. You offer that up. Day of the game, many times there's a shoot around, or in case for football, there's a conference call ahead of time. And you just sit down and talk with them about where we're at, what happened last game. If it's a loss, maybe here's why, spin it a little bit, so they don't come up with their own ideas. Or you can help inform them as to why maybe we lost this game, or give them reasons why we won a game, especially like if, your seventh man off the bench has a nice game. So really it's just relationship building to the point where, like, hopefully they take what you're saying as the gospel. Like anything in this business, a lot of it's relationships. And so you can have when those relationships are good, they can say, give it to me straight. What's going on? And I can have that conversation without, I can have it, off the record conversation. And I know I can be secure with the news that I'm delivering.
One of the things I think is funny, though, is I know that I've done this and I've seen this online where people joke about the San Diego State bingo card, about what the announcers are going to mention. And at some point, they're going to mention the story of Steve Fisher walking around campus, handing out free tickets to students. And there's all these different things. And those are all part of the natural storyline. But after a while, it does become like this bingo card. How long into the game before the announcers are going to mention this? Or how long before they're going to mention that? So from your media relations standpoint perspective, do you look at it like, I'm doing my job correctly, like that's the most important thing? Or is it like, man, we got to get some new material out there for people to talk about instead of these stories from 20 years ago?
I never worried about that stuff. That's a part of the legacy of the program. As you mentioned, they were 2-26 when you were there. Fisher's first year, they didn't win a conference game. And so, to tell the San Diego State story, I don't think you can tell it without saying, he was out there, coach was out there with pocket, tickets in his coat pocket, handing them out. But I think as the team became more successful, that type of stuff wasn't brought up quite as often. For better or for worse, it is what it is. So I never really concerned myself with that. And I think when people watch San Diego State games for so long, like the announcers and things like that, they pick up from what other announcers are saying too. I don't think I've ever said Coach Fisher gave out tickets to students. But again, I started with them on the traveling basis probably 6 or 7 years in. And my first year, they went to the NCAA tournament. So there's a lot to talk about that year.
Well, let's talk more about that then.
Yeah, my first year traveling with them was 05-06. So that was the first time they had won the regular season and the tournament title. We get the bid to go to Salt Lake City and play a pretty tough Indiana team. And we had an opportunity to win and fell a little short there. But yeah, that was the Brandon Heath, Marcus Slaughter years. John Sharp was on that squad. So
how would you describe your relationship with Steve Fisher, especially from the standpoint of someone who is just already a legend for what he's done in the sport and is so well respected, and is someone who is so much older than you as well, in terms of just building that trust, that relationship, and what others can learn about working with someone where maybe you're a little intimidated at first, maybe you're not, but just trying to build that trust and that relationship?
Yeah, man, that was intimidating. Being as young as I was, I think for me in that role, it was just being prepared for everything, whether it's a preseason tournament or just things that are happening at road games or the environment's a little bit different. Just being prepared for what is to come. Whether that's a pregame interview, with Ted Leitner, once the game is going, like the game will run itself, like no big deal. I got my thing to do. He's got a coach, but post game, knowing like where we're doing the post game interview, is there a post game interview with TV after? Where is that at? Where's the post game interview room? I never wanted to be caught off guard with a question. And if I ever was, it was always, I will find out and get back to you. I think that was the biggest thing, was just being prepared, and obviously being around the team as often as I was, every practice was open. And so oftentimes Mark Ziegler of the UT would be at nearly every practice. And so just kind of, we'd have to staff it when he was there. And so just being around, I think that helped my comfort level, being around him and the program. And I think it was vice versa too.
You just said something that made me think about something that a friend of mine told me. So Bud Black, another San Diego State great, he is the manager of the Colorado Rockies. My friend Kevin Collins is one of the PR guys for the Rockies. And what Bud will say, game ends, Kevin goes down to the clubhouse. He's in Bud's locker in his manager's office, and then they bring him to an interview room. And Bud will always say to Kevin, "What do I need to know, Kevin?" And it's Kevin's job to make sure that Bud knows whatever has been discussed on social media, whatever something might have happened in the stands, whatever might have happened on a broadcast, whatever might be going on. And it's Kevin's job to make sure that Bud Black is not surprised by any question, to make sure that he knows that. Is there any kind of similar story that you can share at any point in your life about making sure that your coach or your athletic director or whomever does not get caught off guard by some question?
Yeah, no, I think you're always aware of who's in the building and what's being said online. And on the flip side, whether it's an accomplishment that they've, as a coach, have just, accomplished, or player wise, career highs and things like that. And I think there were many times, especially at Viejas Arena, where, you take the elevator up to the second floor for the post-game press conference. A lot of times or even in the locker room lounge, you pull people aside and be like, you let them know whatever it is, so they're ready. I think it's even more important in a loss, especially an emotional loss. Obviously it's tough with writers having deadlines, but you try to give everyone a little bit extra time to calm down. And then you try to have a conversation about what to say, or some tips on if you kind of get caught, or if you don't know what to say just in general.
What
Yeah,
would
I
be
think
those tips? What would be the tips that you would say to an athlete to kind of help them out?
obviously you want to give credit to your opponent. I think that's always a safe one. You never want to point fingers. And a lot of it's like, how can I be better for the team? Looking ahead, we'll watch film, work on it in practice, and get ready for the next opponent. Everything's a learning experience. I think just those types of things that help coaches or athletes kind of fall back on. And it's not true. It's all things that they're going to do. I just think like when they're in the moment, their emotions can take over. And so giving them a couple reminders, I think always helps.
You can't control what the media ends up writing. And I think about my time as a writer, both at the Daily Aztec. I wrote some things the athletic department definitely did not like, and I heard about it in a variety of ways. And when I worked at the Oakland Tribune, I heard a variety of different ways when someone was upset with an article with mine, whether they thought it was just unfair, or whether it was inaccurate, or whether it did not paint the full picture. I've been yelled at, I've been whispered at, everything in between. For you, Darin, when someone writes something, says something, and you just think that it's either just incorrect or it's wrong or it's unfair, what are your strategies from a media relations standpoint of how to convey that message to the media?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to relationships. If you got a good relationship with a writer, I think you could have, you'll know what the story is ahead of time, and you can have an honest conversation with them, not necessarily sway them, but just to have a conversation about what they're writing, especially if I don't agree with the angle that they're, trying to go at. So I think that's to start. Now, obviously those relationships aren't always like that. And so if that's the case, I think it's really just reaching out and letting them know that I am here as a resource. And if there are any questions, they can reach out to me and let's talk about it. Now, there are times where we don't comment. And at that point, you're not really helping yourself, and there's not much you can do there. But I think if you have a good relationship to begin with, you can have an honest conversation about it and kind of tell them where you're coming from. And hopefully the next time, and hopefully that makes the relation, that improves the relationship moving forward.
All right, here's another topic along those lines, and that is working with the student section, the show. Not everybody remembers this or knows this, but the show is not always a student section. It just began as a bunch of just like guys who like basketball who just decided to become super fans. And the show has created an atmosphere that is pretty legendary and has benefited San Diego State home court advantage. Their slogan is "No one likes us, we don't care." They take pride in that. They take pride in the fact that they say things that others may not like. So that's what they do. And I know that you weren't totally involved in that because it's a little bit more marketing standpoint. But from the standpoint of crisis communications, when they say something or do something or chant something or tweet something, and a lot of people get upset, give us kind of the behind the scenes of how the university responds to something when the student section is doing something that others don't like.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I'll be honest, I wasn't involved with a lot of those conversations because it was a more of a fan experience type thing. A lot of those complaints went to marketing. But, I think a lot of it's just educating, whether it's the leaders or, I would say it's the leaders because they're kind of like the first people in line. It's just educating them. And I think over the years when we had some of those issues, I think the education was taking place. And as you could see, it got better, or less aggressive, I guess you could say, especially in those early days where it was just a handful of passionate basketball fans. And so I think a lot of it comes down to education and communication and having the open lines of communication too.
So you started at San Diego State's media relations as an intern. And then once you've been doing this for a while, well, now you're the one who's helping these interns. Give us some of your experiences in terms of the best students did this. This is how students were able to maximize their internship when they worked under you.
I think a lot of them were just hard workers. A lot of the stuff that we gave them wasn't glamorous, and usually that type of stuff never is. It's the ones that kept coming back every day, doing those not so fun jobs, But the thing that we could, for us, those people were reliable. And so when we actually had bigger things for them to do, they were able to do them. And I think they grew from that. I think you just got to be a sponge and be willing to try everything. A lot of times we would ask them, what are you trying to get out of it? So let's like, for net, like even at Harvard, we have a ton of interns that come through, and it's like, what are you trying to get out of this opportunity? And, obviously there are going to be some things that you're not going to want to do, but it helps us. But so what are some of the things that you want to do? And let's see how we can help you accomplish that. I think that's been the biggest thing, over the years is being open, willing to learn, being reliable, all those types of things.
When you reflect on all of your years at San Diego State, working for the university, what are just some of the Mount Rushmore memories of just, man, I cannot believe that this happened and I was a part of it and I was involved doing this? What are like the most special memories for you?
Being a part of like watching the basketball program grow to what it is today, there's a certain amount of pride there. And not that I played or anything, but just, being along for the ride, all those NCAA tournaments. I think I took some of those for granted. And toward the end, I would just kind of like sit there and go like, wow, like this is a tournament or an event that I used to watch on TV. And like, I'm sitting here on the scorer's desk. My parents can see me on TV. Like, wow. I think just the evolution of the athletic department has been a point of pride for me, just to see, especially like not being there, watching football become, what it is today. The women's soccer program has won, tons of championships. Men's soccer has improved over the years, and track and water polo and, all of them, just making a mark for themselves out west and nationally. Obviously, when I moved out here, people think of San Diego State and they think Kawhi Leonard, but, it's more than that. But the fact that they know San Diego State is a thing is great. And so I think, they've really built that whole athletic department up. And as you know, it wasn't always like that.
Glad you mentioned Kawhi Leonard, because I almost forgot to bring this up. Okay, so it's very well known that Kawhi is a very shy guy. He's not someone who seeks out attention, someone who may not want to do a lot of interviews. But yet when someone's the star of the team, everyone knew he was headed to the NBA. A lot of people want to write stories about him, want to interview him. So from your standpoint, when you have an athlete who doesn't necessarily like to do those types of things, give us how you approached trying to make sure that Kawhi still got the publicity that he deserved, but also so that the rest of the team, especially if some of those players really were good at speaking to the media, how you went about that.
I think it's really knowing who's making the request and who you can like have an honest conversation with to see, like what are they trying to get out of it. If it's just a typical weekly interview and you've got 4 other people who are pretty good at it, you try to spread the wealth a little bit. And especially, you don't want the star player have to fulfill every media request too. We've got, the team is more than one person. And so if you've got a stable full of people who are fully capable of giving great interviews, why wouldn't you want to spread it around? I think in the long run, it helps everybody. It helps the student athlete in their development. It helps get a different opinion out there. So I think it's knowing who you can have a conversation with. Now, obviously, there are certain people and there's certain circumstances where you can't adjust on the fly. And so in those cases, if a certain player or an athlete doesn't want to, or is, they're shy, you try to prep them a little bit ahead of time so they're not quite as nervous going into it. I think those were a couple of things that I've done over the years.
So when you leave San Diego State and you go to Boston, you're at Harvard now, knowing everything that we've just discussed throughout this conversation and all these great memories, explain to us how easy or how hard the decision was to leave America's finest city for a great opportunity at Harvard.
Yeah, it was really difficult, going, arriving at San Diego State in the fall of 2000, and then going to school there, working there. And, at the time I was 36, I think. And so I spent half my time in Los Angeles and half my the other half of my life in San Diego. And so it was difficult for sure. And before I landed the job at Harvard, I had, interviews here and there. It was no thanks, no thanks, no thanks. Harvard was no thanks at first. I think the person who they offered it to ended up turning it down. So then they came back. I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. But it was a change for sure. You go from the Mountain West, sunny skies and 70 and 75 to Boston, cold, snow, the Ivy League, frigid temperatures in April. It was hard. It was hard. And everyone knows who Harvard is, but not everyone knows that Harvard has sports and Division I sports. And so it was a different job. It is a different job. It's got different challenges, and I've had to be open and learn some different things.
You mentioned the different challenges and that Harvard plays sports. I mean, the Harvard-Yale football game. I mean, this is one of the longest running, most historic football games that are out there. Describe in your words what it's like being a part of it and kind of how you just continue to come up with what are the different ways that we can publicize this to make the history there, but also emphasize who's here now.
I didn't really understand the magnitude of that game when I arrived at Harvard. I think my first real event was Harvard-Yale at Fenway Park. But even then, they didn't really give me a lot to do. I knew it was a rivalry game. It's at Fenway, so everyone's kind of running around with their heads cut off because it's a new venue. It's a baseball stadium. I started to understand it a little bit more in 2019 when we were at Yale. People travel far and wide for that game. It's crazy. People love to tailgate. They all wear their stuff. Oftentimes, the other teams on both campuses don't schedule their games on that day to allow their athletes to go to Harvard-Yale. As an aside, that was a game where there was a protest on the field. That was very eye-opening for me. They don't have lights there, and so we had to go toward the side where the scoreboard was at. It was something else. And then COVID hit, so we didn't play it for a couple of years. And then we finally had it back at Harvard last season, so in 2022. And that was something that was a cool event. With as many people that returned for the game, I think it's very easy to promote it in a way that highlights the history and the tradition while also not ignoring what's at stake in the present. Usually both teams are in the hunt for the Ivy League title. And so that kind of speaks for itself. And everyone in attendance is quite aware of that. And so it kind of just raises the stakes. In the Ivy League, we usually get a game a week on one of the ESPN channels. And that one is always on ESPN. Usually it's on ESPN News. Sometimes it's on 2. And so there's just a little extra juice in the building. And it's great. It's great.
Before we wrap things up, I want to give you the open floor for any other just thoughts, opinions, advice, subjects that I should have brought up that I forgot to bring up that you think is pertinent to the conversation that we've had here about just sports and media relations and forming those relationships.
I think we hit quite a bit of it already. I would say the profession is changing quite a bit just with the rise of social media and things like that. And so I think any of the listeners who are just starting out, I think it's good to be open to learning new things. When I started, and you've got a little bit of a head start on me, but it used to be just writing previews and writing recaps, doing media guides and dealing with the media. And nowadays, if you're not at a Power 4 school where the resources are unlimited, a lot of times, in my case, we're in Photoshop all the time. We got to learn how to use cameras and, shoot video and edit video. And so I think having all those skills is very helpful. Once you get in, and even if you try to get out, just having the ability and a baseline knowledge of some of these programs helps, because this job is not just, like I mentioned, just media relations anymore. It's more of a storytelling business. And so we use all those tools to help tell the story whether it's athletes or our teams or our schools. I think just being open to those things. Because when I started at Harvard, I had baseline knowledge of Photoshop. I knew I had to get into Premiere, and so I learned a little bit before I got there. But it's been very helpful because we do a lot of that stuff on our own. Whereas other places, they have graphic designers and video people. And, we've got video people too, but with 42 teams, the most in the country, they can't do everything. A lot of that stuff falls on our desk.
42 teams? You have 42 teams at Harvard?
Yeah.
Name them.
Most in Division I. We've got good athletics in the Ivy League. We just beat Yale in basketball, where San Diego State did. They won a game in Princeton last year. Our fencing team this year won a national title. We got 3 track and cross country athletes winning titles. Our squash team's pretty good. Men's lacrosse, our lacrosse programs are good.
Your rowing is always good.
Yeah. We got the number 1 men's heavyweight and lightweight rowing teams in the country. So in the Ivy League, athletics is pretty competitive at the Division I level. And so I think it's a great opportunity for me and the league to, help promote some of this stuff using a lot of the tools that I learned at San Diego State.
Yeah, I'm just going to piggyback on what Darin said. Learn Premiere, learn Premiere, learn Premiere. I cannot stress enough, no matter what you are doing, whether it is journalism, writing, broadcasting, media relations, social media, learn Premiere so that you will be better at your job and your life will be so much better and easier once you just learn Premiere.
You learn Premiere?
I recommend that people learn Premiere. Yes. All right. We end this podcast by giving shout outs and bragging about other people from San Diego State who are doing things in the world that makes us proud. So go ahead, Darin. Who do you want to shout out?
I'll shout out a former intern of mine or at San Diego State, Mike Passanisi. He is in communications with the San Francisco Giants. He's got an interesting path. He worked for the San Diego Surf Dogs. I don't know if you remember them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ricky Henderson played for them.
Yeah, so he did some broadcasting and PR stuff with them. He's worked in minor league baseball, similar to yourself, doing play-by-play and media relations. He worked with the Savannah Sandgnats and the Altoona Curve. He was there for Strasburg's minor league or professional debut, I think it was. And he kind of parlayed that into a gig with the Mets. And now he's with the Giants. So, he does PR for MLB during the playoffs as well. He's been everywhere. I think he's driven across country a lot too. So he might be someone that you might want to talk to. He's got an interesting path.
I'm going to add him to my master spreadsheet of people for next year's podcast.
Yes. He's going to hate me for it, but if you do ask him and he agrees, just ask him about his Jordan collection too. He's got a nice closet of shoes.
I just made note of that. All right. For the individuals who I'm going to brag about, actually only one of them actually earned a degree from San Diego State, but I just want to give a shout out to all of the media relations individuals who were at San Diego State when I was a student, who put up with me and all of the other crazy characters from the Daily Aztec, who sometimes made their lives miserable and sometimes aided them, probably made their lives more miserable than anything else. But John Rosenthal oversaw the department when I was there. Dave Kuhn worked for San Diego State for 31 years. I spent a ton of time with Dave over at Smith Field before it was called Tony Gwynn Stadium. Dave was the SID at baseball for a long time. Had a lot of great memories with Dave. Lisa Vad, who did get her master's degree from San Diego State, was in the media relations department. I was there. And of course, the legendary Brett Hansen, who then went to Fox Sports Arizona. Now he's working for the Arizona Diamondbacks. Brett worked at SDSU. And so those were the main 4 contacts when I was a student. I have great memories of all 4 of them, as do all of my fellow Daily Aztec alums from those days. And it always just makes me smile when I think about their names and some of those interactions. And I can only imagine what they thought about us at the Daily Aztec when we were not around for us to hear what they were saying about us.
Yeah, Dave Kuhn, he was in the office when I was there, and he helped me out a lot. I was the swimming and diving contact, and so before the Aquaplex was a thing, the team used to compete at the Kroc Center, and so Dave Dave and I would leave a little early. There used to be a Taco Bell down there, and we used to get lunch and then go down to the pool, and he would help me with all the entries and things like that. I love Dave Kuhn.
All right, Darin, I love this conversation. It's great to see you and your smiling face as always. I can't wait for the next time that we're able to hang out again in person one day, but thanks for being generous with your time and sharing all of your stories.
Absolutely. Thanks, Josh.
Once again, that was Darin Wong. My name is Josh Sushon, and this is going to wrap up this semester's edition of the Where You At podcast. We are going on hiatus for the summer, but don't worry, we will be back again in the fall with more stories of San Diego State alums. So for Temple Northrop and everyone with the SDSU School of Journalism and Media Studies, I'm Josh Sushon. Thank you for listening this semester. We will be back again in the fall.
Thanks for listening to the Where You At podcast. This is Devin Watley from the class of 2021. Thanks to Martine Marine for creating the music you're hearing right now, and Alex Piscatelli for her work on the podcast name and artwork on social media. And a reminder to SDSU alums, we really want to know where you're at. Tell us about your career. Get involved in the school. There's many ways you can do this, from donating your time or money, mentoring students, to even speaking in classrooms, in person or on Zoom. Your work can help us grow the program and create more opportunities for our students to succeed. Again, thanks for listening. Subscribe to this podcast. Tell your friends. Recommend us a future guest. And go Aztecs.